I'm Cheryl and I'm an editor. I work in television and also feature films. I always knew I wanted to do something to do with the dramatic arts, and then coming through high school, I remember zeroing in on film and television rather than theatre. And at film school, once I learned what editing was, I realised that's how my brain worked, and that was the role I wanted to do. I know there are some people that for time, they'll start with the print takes, but I try and watch all of the takes because sometimes there'll be something in those first takes that is just worth saving, and it's also nice to see the process. Quite often you can understand why they went for that other take. What are the lines where it's like, oh, we hit that line in take 4, but take 5 was really for this moment. So then it's putting it together, seeing how it sits. And the first cut for me is always just, it's following the gut. And then once you've got your individual pieces, your individual scenes, you start sticking them together, and that's where you really find the rhythms, you find the pace, and you figure out the moments that where you might be doubling up on things, or you're spending too much time on things, or where you want to draw out those moments because they're important. Film these days, it's a $1 million film or it's a $100 million film. So when you're spending $100 million on a film, you got to appeal to as many people as possible. You got to make sure you get as many people to come and see that film. So you can't really target it at specific audiences. You need to keep it wide open. But television has been an amazing, television really has moved into this world of, well, let's find the people who this story will speak to. Let's make a show that might only appeal to this smaller group, but they're going to love it. And I think that's where, Netflix, Amazon, all of these sort of the new content that's being created for television, it's widening the scope, and it's while also narrowing. Instead of making something for everyone, let's make things for everyone. I just had so much fun on Hanna. That was a show where I read the script, I knew immediately that I loved it and I enjoyed it. Probably most of the challenge of Hanna was, being episodic. It gets shot out of order, and we had a lot of sort of big set pieces where a big piece of the action is being shot on location, but then a whole other side of it that's happening at the same time that you're going to have to intercut. It's happening in completely different locations. So you've got a whole bunch of pieces, but you don't have the other side. And so you'll put together just the section that you have at the time, and you make it work as if it's just, that's the whole story. And then you get the other side of it, and then you add that in. You might be missing a key moment, or you might have gotten that key moment, but not in a way where you can really put the weight on it that you want. Like there was a fight sequence in Hanna where one of our main characters got shot in the arm and goes down. And that one moment, I had it on a few different cameras, and I was able to put it together so that you could see that it was happening. But because we didn't necessarily have a really tight close-up, the gravity of that moment wasn't landing as much. And it was one of those situations where I remembered thinking, oh, it would be really good if we could get an extra shot of this. And before I'd even asked for it, our producer, Tom Mullins, had already called and said, I feel like we're a bit thin on this moment. Do you think we need to go back and get it? And I was like, absolutely. And it was just one of those wonderful situations where he was already thinking of it before I even suggested it. So probably one of the bigger challenges was just thinking of the big picture when you didn't have all the pieces. It's been said again by George Lucas, David Lynch, this idea that an artwork is never finished, it is only abandoned. And there's some truth to that, because it's not like there's ever a point in time where a flag flies up and it's like, bing, 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 you're done. You can keep massaging and tweaking until, the end of times if you want to. But there is a point where I feel like you're making changes, but you're not necessarily improving. And it's knowing when you've hit that point. A VFX artist I remember speaking to was saying, getting the shot 95% of the way, you can usually get done in a reasonable amount of time. But that last 5% takes almost as long. And cutting is very similar. You will get the scene to, it's pretty much done. But that last 5%, those last little tweaks could take, how long it took to assemble it times 10. You don't ever know when you're completely done. It's more a sense of just, at what point are you not making it better? At what point are you just changing it? Digital technology really has changed the way we make films and television. You don't need as much money in the first instance, so I think it's opening up to new voices, and people who didn't have access to the ability to tell their stories can now tell their stories. But then also the way that we're putting that footage together, the way that we create it, to be able to edit digitally versus editing on film, it's so immediate. You can create so many different versions, you can try so many things out. Because of the way we're shooting now, you end up with a lot more footage, which means that you need a lot more time to put it together and go through it and cut it. So it's not necessarily making the process faster, because there's always going to be the time that you have to think about how are we going to put this together, how are we going to create it. So instead of front loading that like we used to do with film, now I think we're doing that in the cutting room, and that's where you're really figuring out where the story is. I can't imagine working on any of the shows that I've worked on without having the ability to collaborate with Avid the way that you can. On the feature films I've worked on the television shows I've worked on, you've got large teams of people who are all working on the same show. The ability to share the footage like that, I mean, I just can't comprehend how people could work on systems where there's a delay between getting one system up to date with the other system. One tool I use a lot is the replace function. It's great when you're auditioning sort of different takes, and asymmetric trimming. I use asymmetric trimming all the time. It's so great to be able to go to an edit, add time or subtract time, but decide at what point on all the other tracks, you might have music, you might have effects, and roll them at the same time, and you haven't sort of broken your cut. A good editor in the first case just needs to be a good storyteller, but then you also need to have a good command of like character and pace, good judgment for picking performances, and I think you just want to be a good presence in the cutting room so that people feel comfortable bringing anything to you and you can just try it out. Editing isn't so much about whether or not you know how to use the technology, it's about storytelling and the craft, but you can learn that technology from very early on. So get in and just start cutting stuff, get a feel for it, see if you like it, because the more you do it, the better you get at it. And then just like make your presence known, get out into the industry, network, meet people, tell them what you want to do, tell them what you want to try, and just be a hard worker, but just show up.